Welcome, everybody. I'm Susan Abraham. I'm chair of the Theological Studies Department here at Loyola Marymount University. Welcome. Welcome to you all. As we begin, I'd like to say two things about our speaker this year, even as my colleague Karen Enriquez will formally introduce her in a bit. First, Professor Dianne Bergant was my teacher in 1994, and at that time she was already deep into her writing and thinking about eco-sensitive theology. Secondly, when I invited Professor Bergant to be our speaker for this year, she informed me that she had known Sister Mary Milligan and was acquainted with her. In other words, Professor Bergant felt doubly obliged. Arm twisting by a former student, and a sense of deep friendship to a woman we all admire and in whose memory we are gathered here. So thank you, Dianne Bergant. As we know, an event like this owes its life to the work and vision of many. First of all, we are very grateful to the R.S.H.M community and to Sister Joan Tracy for endowing this lecture, for its vision of gathering us all here, and for disseminating current work in spirituality to a wide public. I also want to acknowledge Sister Mary Janino. This is a tradition here. Sister Mary Janino is watching us from afar, though not as far as she normally is. She is here in New York City, so hello, Sister Mary. I'm very grateful to the Department of Theological Studies, to many of my colleagues who are here. Thank you for being here, for your support. To the Mary Milligan Lecture Committee, who has worked very hard, and in particular to Faith Sevilla, our Senior Administrative Coordinator, who does a lot of work behind the scenes, and I'm going to get a scolding from her for doing this. But thank you, Faith. Without faith, there is no theology. I'm going to get real scolded. But a number of other offices also help to make this event what it is. And here I'd like to identify Donna Gray and her office. Donna does a lot of work in the background supporting us, particularly taking care of donors and maintaining relationships with people. Thank you, Donna, and to your office. Thank you. Thank you to the event management staff. There are a number of people amongst us who are helping us. There are too many to name, so I'm just going to call you the event specialists. Thank you very much. And as always, I would like to thank the graduate students. They too, who have been at the tables to welcome you. They too have been part of our mission, trying to welcome you and to provide hospitality. I'm also in very many ways very, very grateful to the work of Marymount Institute and the Marymount Institute Press, particularly to Teresia de Vroom and her group of people, Elias, Will Pupa, and in particular, August Swanson, whose particular image, we're using one of his image. Is Mr. Swanson here with us? There he is. Welcome and thank you so much. Thank you so much for your beauty, and thank you for letting us use some of that. Thank you so very much. And in the end, in closing, I would like very much to thank Dean Robin Crabtree and Dean Michael Horan, who is here. The support of the Bellarmine College of Liberal Arts Dean's Office means a lot to us as we do this work. But I would also like to thank very much the president of Loyola Marymount University, President Tim Snyder, who commented on Professor Bergant's work. And he says, We are now invited into creation through a vision of spirituality that celebrates divine beauty in myriad forms. So this is the invitation of our president, and on behalf of all of them, I welcome you again. To set us in the mood, however, and due to the kindness of Father Jim Earps, who is Director of Campus Ministry here at LMU, to John Flaherty, thank you very much, Associate Director of Campus Ministry, and to the one and only, the peerless, the invaluable Chris De Silva, as you hear, who is here with the Sacred Heart Ensemble. There are a number of young people here who will present us with original music and song in order to welcome us and set us in this mood to listen to a spirituality of creation and being together. So welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. Chris, you're on.
Touch the earth lightly, use the earth gently, nourish the life of the world in our care, gift of great wonder, ours to surrender. Trust in the children tomorrow will bear.
We who in danger create hunger, patience and death for all creatures that live. We who would foster clouds of disaster, God of our planet, forestall and forgive. Let there be greening, birth from the burning, water that blesses and air that is sweet. Health in God's garden, hope in God's children, regeneration and peace will complete. God of all living, God of all loving, God of the ceiling, the snow and the sun, Jesus reflect us, Christ reconnect us, using us gently and making us one. We cannot own the sunlit sky, the moon, the wildflowers growing.
For we are part of all that is within life's river flowing.
With open hands receive and share the Children have no bread but tears, and Lord sound their warning. God calls humanity to wake, to join in commonly round, that all may have abundant life in oneness with their neighbor. God calls humanity to join as partners in creating a future free from want or fear, by soonness celebrating. That new world beckons from afar, invites our shared endeavor, that all may have abundant life, and peace endure forever. With a word you birth creation, giving shape to boundless space, casting light through velvet darkness by the brilliance of your grace. With a word you formed all beings, filling land, air, and sea. Human creatures in your image, by your sovereign let there be. Your word, a lamp for our steps, a light for our path, the path that brings us home. Your word, a lamp
Good evening to everybody. My name is Karen Enriquez, and I'm assistant professor in theological studies here at LMU. It's actually my first year here, so I'm really excited to be part of this event. And I'm very, very honored to introduce the speaker for this year's Mary Milligan Endowed Lecture in Spirituality, a great theologian, prolific scholar, an eminent speaker, a dynamic speaker, Professor Dianne Bergant. She is the Carol Stoll-Mueller Distinguished Professor Emerita of Old Testament Studies at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. She's a member of the Congregation of the Sisters of St. Agnes and was past president of the Catholic Biblical Association of America from 2000 to 2001. And from 2002 through 2005, she wrote the weekly column, The Word, for America Magazine. In an interview, she says that she got into the study of scripture through a phone call that said she should get her MA in scripture. And as she was finishing and was about to say goodbye, she was told, well, while you're there, you might as well just get a doctorate. And so she says it was as well planned as that. But it couldn't have been a better decision, she says, than if she had made it herself. And it has definitely been a decision that has enriched all of us and enriched the areas of biblical interpretation, biblical theology, particularly on issues of peace, ecology, and feminism, which we're going to hear about today. This is evidence in her numerous publications, which I cannot have the time to name all of them, but they include, for example, works on the books of Genesis, the Song of Songs, Lamentations, books such as People of the Covenant, An Invitation to the Old Testament, and Scripture, Engaging Theology, Catholic Perspectives. In the area of the Bible and ecology in 1998, she wrote The Earth is the Lord's, the Bible, Ecology, and Worship. And her most recent publication is A New Heaven, A New Earth, the Bible and Catholicity, a study of various biblical passages from the perspective of the integrity of creation. These publications and many others not only demonstrate her vast scholarship, but also her ability to communicate her insights in Scripture to wide audiences. Even before Pope Francis' encyclical on the environment Laudato Si', she was already writing on the interconnection between social justice and eco-justice, and a renewed understanding of the biblical view of creation. As she wrote in America Magazine, this was in 2007, perhaps we have not realized the gravity of ecological issues because we were not attentive to the limits of the natural wealth of the world, a world that has been prodigal in surrendering its treasures to us. Even when we have been conscious of nature's limits, we may have disregarded them because we believed that the wealth of creation was ours for the taking. After all, does not our biblical tradition assure us that we were commissioned by God to subdue the earth and have dominion over the fish and the birds and every living thing? But as she reminds us, this anthropocentric view is not the worldview of Scripture. Rather, she argues, we must cherish the earth, nurture its fruitfulness, and foster its growth. We must serve it and guard it. We can, indeed we must, exercise control over the earth, but this must be done in accord with the life processes that are operative within its very heart. We human beings have the serious responsibility of acting as faithful stewards who serve the wishes of the owner as we manage the resources of the owner. She says it should be clear from this understanding of the creation accounts of the Bible that our religious tradition calls us to ecological responsibility. And so tonight we will hear her speak of an eco-sensitive spirituality as we welcome her as she gives her lecture, God So Loved the Cosmos. But do we? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got to put this up here. The problem with introductions, they set you up. However, thank you so much for the beautiful music. What a wonderful way to begin this. It was just wonderful. So my topic, God so loved the cosmos, but do we? Toward an eco-sensitive spirituality. What is it about the universe that so fascinates the human spirit? We turn to the sun during the day looking for warmth and reassurance, and to the night sky in wonder and awe. We've always been challenged by its immensity, captivated by its power, and thrilled by its grandeur. Down through the centuries, many have believed that the mystery of their future is somehow hidden in the position of the stars. It's no wonder that celestial bodies have frequently been thought to be somehow divine. The way we understand the cosmos has always influenced many of our religious perceptions. Evidence of this celestial influence can be traced through the history of scientific discovery. Pythagoras' insistence that Earth is a sphere and not flat challenged literal belief that God is enthroned in the heaven above us, regardless of what sports figures might do. Copernicus's heliocentric model of the universe further threatened well-established concepts of divine determined human dominance of the universe. Darwin's insight into evolutionary processes disputes the notion of the direct creation of humankind. These revolutionary scientific discoveries or theories have challenged well-honored religious understandings of how God works and of the place of human beings in creation. Over time, many of these theological understandings have been corrected or reinterpreted. However, correction or reinterpretation has not come easily. We face such a scientific revolutionary situation today. Contemporary cosmologists speak of an evolving universe, one that's not completed in the 6 days of creation, regardless of how one might perceive the meaning of 6 days spoken of in the Bible's creation narrative. They insist that there are actually multiverses containing billions of galaxies, some of which, no doubt, contain planets that are able to support life. If this is the case, how are we to understand the Bible's claim of human superiority? How are we to reconcile the findings of contemporary science that is cosmocentric with the religious message of the Bible, which is so obviously anthropocentric? This is the challenge placed before us all today. Religious groups have always welcomed a rethinking that has caused by new scientific insights. In the 17th century, Galileo was brought before the infamous Inquisition, which judged his thinking about heliocentrism to be, quote, vehemently subject of heresy. As a result of this judgment, he spent the rest of his life under house arrest. His condemnation lasted for 350 years, until 1979, when he was officially pardoned by the church. I'll bet he was happy. More recently was the censoring of the French Jesuit paleontologist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. He was forbidden by officials of the Catholic Church to publish his controversial ideas about the relationship between science and religion. Chardin died in 1955 without seeing the far-reaching influence his thinking would have on future generations. The attitude of church bodies has changed since Chardin's time. A major theological response to this issue came in 1988 when the World Council of Churches sponsored a consultation in France which attracted scholars espousing various liberation and other political theologies. All of the participants came to realize that the theme of liberation can be applied to questions dealing not only with human society, but also with all forms and indeed with life itself, with Earth itself. The report of this consultation delivered to the World Council was remarkable in its, quote, emphasis on linking concerns of ecological sustainability with concerns of social justice, on moving beyond oppressive understandings of God, on recognizing the deleterious effects of an exclusively Western understanding of development on peoples of Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Oceania, on recognizing the importance of science for contemporary Christian thought, on recognizing biblical resources for affirming what the World Council has called the integrity of creation, end quote. This report offers the following as a definition for the phrase integrity of creation. It's different than environmentalism. Environmentalism is still anthropocentric. We are concerned about our environment because if we are not, we will not survive. Now that's important. But integrity of creation is concerned with creation regardless of whether we find it useful. So the definition of integrity of creation is this: the value of all creatures in and for themselves, for one another and for God, and their interconnectedness in a diverse whole that has unique value for God. This is what is known as integrity of creation. It has value in itself, not simply in its usefulness. The World Council has continued to be strongly committed to this issue. At about the same time, the Roman Catholic Church addressed this issue as well. In 1971, Pope Paul VI spoke of the ecological crisis in his apostolic letter, Octogesimus Adveniens. Quote, humans are suddenly becoming aware that by an ill-considered exploitation of nature, they risk destroying it and becoming, in their turn, the victim of this degradation. That's still environmentalism. On January 1st, 1990, Pope John Paul II issued his World Day of Peace address entitled The Ecological Crisis, a Common Responsibility. In it, he made a very strong statement about individual responsibility. Quote, Christians in particular realize that their responsibility within creation and their duty toward nature and the Creator are of essential part of their faith. End quote. In 1991, the bishops of the United States issued Renewing the Earth, an invitation to reflection and action in light of Catholic social teaching. They noted the undeniable connection between the degradation of aspects of the natural world with social issues such as world poverty and the exploitation of vulnerable racial and ethnic groups. They further emphasized, quote, a God-centered and sacramental view of the universe which grounds human accountability for the fate of the earth, end quote. In their 1999 statement, Sharing Catholic Social Teaching, Challenges and Directions, the bishops of the United States insist that care for the earth is a requirement of their faith. Finally, several Episcopal groups in North America have issued statements that address ecological concerns of their respective regions. Concern for the health of Earth and all earthly creatures has appeared again and again in the major documents of the Church. Why haven't we heard this? Most recently, it is the subject of Laudato Si, the ecumenical letter of Pope Francis, 2015. The issue has certainly become a significant part of church teaching, but is it fundamental in the spirituality of individual believers? Unfortunately, this is not always the case. If Anselm, St. Anselm, is correct and theology is, quote, faith seeking understanding, end quote, and if spirituality is the way we live out that faith, and if eco-sensitivity and eco-responsibility are elements within contemporary theology, as recent popes and bishop conferences claim, then these elements should be essential in a contemporary spirituality. Reflection on such a spirituality is the purpose of this presentation. I call it the earth is the Lord's. We have a sense, many of us learned, again, this doesn't mean we were taught this, because we learned a lot of things we were never taught. Just like we're taught a lot of things we never learned. There's a phrase in Psalm 24. The first phrase in Psalm 24 says the earth is the Lord's, not ours. So I call it the earth is the Lord. The statement that the earth is the Lord is the fundamental premise undergirding the teaching of Laudato Si. Pope Francis clearly states, quote, ecological culture cannot be reduced to a series of urgent and partial responses to the immediate problems of pollution, environmental decay, and the depletion of natural resources. Thank God we are at least aware of these things. Many people aren't. I hope we are aware of them. The Pope is saying that's not enough. Ecological culture cannot be reduced to them. There needs to be a distinctive way of looking at things, a way of thinking, of setting policies, an educational program, a lifestyle, and a spirituality, which together generate resistance to the assault of the technocratic paradigm. End quote. The Pope calls for a new way of thinking, a contemporary eco-sensitive spirituality. Such a spirituality should challenge our often unreflected upon notion that we are the center of the universe rather than a component, a very important component, but still merely a component. In an attempt to sketch the profile of an eco-sensitive spirituality, three aspects of Pope Francis's perspective, as found in the encyclical, will serve here as lenses for examining various biblical passages. I want to go back and just say something about the arrogance of our sense that we are the center of the universe. And again, the cosmologists tell us we shouldn't even talk about universe. It's multiverse. There are millions of universes. And in each universe, there are millions of galaxies. But we know there's only one that's really important. And in these galaxies, who knows how many planetary systems there are? But we know there's only one that's important. And in those planetary systems, there are who knows how many planets. And we know which one is important. And on that planet, we know which creature is important. I think that's a little arrogant. So we've got three aspects. These aspects are in some way call for a radical new way of religious anthropology. We have to understand the dignity of human beings within the right context. Within the right context. I am not a deep ecologist. There are deep ecologists who would say the worst thing that has happened to the natural world is the appearance of human beings. It's the worst thing that has happened. Now, I'm not a deep ecologist, but I share that with you. Think about it. So the three elements I want us, or the three aspects I want us to look at for a moment are rejection of current distorted anthropocentrism. That's the Holy Father's language. Distorted or radical anthropocentrism comes from the two Greek words, anthropos, human, and centrism, human-centered. That's one. Second, a recognition of the interconnectedness of all creation. So often we talk about, nature as if it's not us. We are separate from the natural world. It's nature and us. What do you think we are? Contrary to Matt Damon, we are not Martians. The third is an appreciation of the interdependence of all elements of creation. And scientists will tell us this as well. We are so totally dependent on the natural world. It is not dependent on us. It can go on without us and clean itself up. It may take millions of years, but it can do it. Since the way we understand aspects of human nature influences the way we understand our relationship with God, an ecosensitive anthropology should result in an ecosensitive spirituality. So the first, rejection of a current distorted anthropocentrism. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis denounces what he calls tyrannical, distorted, or misguided anthropocentrism. By this, he is referring to a prevailing point of view that sees humankind as the center of all created reality and the measure according to which all else is evaluated. First of all, there is absolutely no way that we can understand anything except through an anthropocentric point of view. Because we are human beings, and we see everything through our own point of view. So there's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is that that becomes the standard evaluating everything else. If it suits our needs, if it promotes our goals, it has value. If it doesn't, it has no value. An example, what is good weather? Good weather is weather that does not inconvenience us. Such a perspective the perspective is radical anthropocentrism, has little concern for any creatures except to the extent that they are useful in advancing human goals. This way of thinking has often been legitimated and reinforced by a literal reading of the creation narrative in Genesis 1, where human beings appear to have been created godlike and commissioned by God to, quote, subdue the earth and have dominion over the fish and the birds and every living thing. A closer look at this narrative will offer us a very different view of humankind's place in the natural creation. In the first creation account, which is Genesis 1, the fundamental character of the human couple and of their subsequent commissioning is found in the expression image of God. Now, there's whole libraries explaining what an image of God is, and I'd be willing to bet that most, if not all of us, have learned that our soul is the image of God. And that is a way of understanding that metaphor. But that's not the way the ancients understood it. So we have the notion image of God. And also in Genesis 1, we have the twofold commission, subdue and have dominion. That's the killer. Subdue and have dominion. In the ancient world, people fashioned images of their gods. I'm not talking about idols, images. Some kind of a representation, usually some symbol of their gods. The images were not considered the gods in themselves, but were simply representation of the power and authority of the gods. Power and authority that was actually jurisdictional. So you set up an image of a god, and that says, in this place where that image is, whatever the symbol was, this God has jurisdiction. Thus, when in Egypt, one was under the jurisdiction of Egyptian gods, when in Mesopotamia, under Mesopotamian gods, etc. This explains the religious trauma experienced when they were exiled from their land, which was really the land of their God. Their religious identity was challenged by such an upheaval. Aspects of this practice of setting up images was not unlike what we today look at in the national flag. We set up a symbol of the jurisdiction of a nation. That's what the national flag is. The national flag is not the nation, but it represents the jurisdiction of the nation. It's a kind of symbol of the jurisdiction of the power and authority of the nation. While it's true that in the ancient world, the images as symbols of power and authority often came to be valued as idols, that actually possessed some form of power, this does not seem to be the original intent, except in Egypt. The people in Egypt really believed that their monarchy were inherently divine. That was not always the case in Mesopotamia. Since it was how the images of God functioned in the ancient times, then to say that the human couple was made in the image of God for the ancient writer is to say that they were meant to represent where and how God exercised power and authority. Probably today we would talk about that as witness. Though they were not themselves divine, there was always the great temptation, as was the case with material images of gods, to begin to think of themselves as somehow divine. In fact, Genesis 3 tells us that this was precisely the sin of the first couple. It's got nothing to do with eating a piece of fruit. That's a metaphor. It has meaning. They were not satisfied being image of God, following God's directives and representing where and how God is supreme. In the narrative, the serpent argued, God knows well that the moment you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, your eyes will be opened and you will be like gods, knowing what is good and what is bad. In other words, being image of God is not enough when you might have the opportunity of being a god. The serpent suggested something very attractive, and the couple chose to follow that attraction. The sin was certainly one of disobedience. However, the underlying reason for the disobedience was hubris, which is understood to be excessive pride toward and defiance of God. There are other aspects of the metaphor image of God that are pertinent here. In the ancient world, kings and queens were looked upon as being somehow divine. This explains why the establishment of the monarchy in Israel was initially a religious threat to the sovereignty of God of Israel. Read 1 Samuel 10. You cannot have a God because that will rival, you cannot have a king because in the ancient world the kings were thought to be divine. There is only one God. And so there's that struggle that we find in 1 Samuel chapters 8 to 10. The major myths of origin address the human need of securing the stability of the world and of society, and that was the responsibility of the gods and of the kings. And it was very easy to begin to look at the kings and queens, and it was a patriarchal society by and large. The only time they had a queen who was not simply the wife of the king is when there was no king. Then for a while, at least in ancient Israel, there was a queen, until they got rid of her because there was a 9-year-old boy. So what we have then is the whole notion of monarchy, which gradually took on itself, as I said, primarily in Mesopotamia, primarily in Egypt, not in Mesopotamia. And Israel's monarchy was much more like the monarchy of Mesopotamia. You didn't come to hear a lecture on ancient history, except you've got to know what image of God is all about. So in a certain sense, it's a metaphor that says where human beings are, God reigns supreme. Now use that as examination of conscience sometime. Where we are and the way we live, do we manifest the jurisdiction of God, the supremacy of God, or can people rightly say, who died and left you, boss? Now, there are aspects then of this notion of image of God that were very, very pertinent, as I said. So now we've got the notion of subdue and have dominion, which is royal language. So you have image of God, which means human beings who are monarchy, and subdue and have dominion, which is royal language. So I want to say, just as the second creation narrative presents the first human beings as farmers, they're in a garden. The story is probably from the perspective of agrarian people. The first story is told as probably from a royal point of view. So the notion image of God says nothing about human beings being divine. That's not a good reading of the story. It's a misinterpretation of the story. So this way of reading the creation narrative challenges any kind of tyrannical, distorted, or misguided anthropocentrism. Psalm 8 is a beautiful psalm. O Lord, my God, when I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, and there's this magnificent standing in awe of the mystery of creation, and standing in awe and taken almost in a mystical way of the beauty of creation, the psalmist says, and what are human beings in the face of all of this? That's the same kind of theology you have in Genesis 1. When you think about the magnificence of the natural world, and then you see in the midst of all of that, what are human beings that you have made them? A little less than Elohim, which means the gods, less than the gods, not gods. So this first creation narrative, as I say, does not present us as having autonomous authority over the natural world. This way of reading the creation narrative challenges any kind of tyrannical, distorted, or misguided anthropocentrism. Ignorance of or unwillingness to acknowledge the limitations of human governance, which is very hard for all of us, over the natural world may be at the heart of much of the arrogance that many people exhibit today in their attitude toward the rest of creation. We can do what we want. And you may not use that language, but the way we live, you and I, we are complicit. Many still want to be God, boasting unconditional authority and uncontrolled and unlimited control over other people and over the rest of the natural world. Temptation to hubris is ever present. So that's one particular tradition that challenges that kind of anthropocentrism. A second biblical narrative that challenges distorted anthropocentrism is the book of Job. The framework of the story is well known to many people. The book of Job. Job, of course, is a righteous man, suffers loss of everything and also physical plagues, clings to his righteousness, and is then rewarded for his righteousness. That's the Job that many people know. They talk about the patience of Job. The book of Job is 42 chapters. What I have just described is the first 2 chapters and the last 11 verses of chapter 42. All it is the framework. The real book of Job is from chapter 3 to chapter 42. And there you have Job shaking his fist at heaven. You have an angry Job, a Job who says, why have you done this to me? You're the one that has done this. I am not the one responsible. This is not a patient Job. So most people don't really know the dynamic of the book of Job. The real story of Job is found in chapters 3 to 42. There we see Job, who struggles with his plight, who denies any form of serious culpability that might have brought on such suffering, who argues with his theologically astute visitors. They have the same theology, or I should say, his theology is the same as theirs. And the theology is our theology, which is the theology of retribution. Goodness should be rewarded, and evil should be punished. We all operate out of that. That's why when we don't know why certain things happen, we ask, what have I done to deserve this? And if you haven't asked that question, I would say you haven't asked it yet. We all ask that question. We look then at the book of Job, and what we discover, Job says finally to God, come and answer me. I challenge you. Come and explain yourself. So Job is struggling with what he perceives as injustice and the injustice of innocent suffering. It's anthropocentrism. And what does God do when God comes? He says to Job, where were you when I created the universe? It's a whole set of questions about the cosmos. Do you understand how it works? Can you make it rain? Can you make it stop? We may know how to make it rain, but do we know how to make it stop? So he has a whole set of questions about the natural world, questions that Job, if he answers, because he doesn't in the book, but the presumption is it's I don't know or I can't control it. And then there's another whole set of questions about animals over which human beings at the time of the story of Job did not have control. So it's the same kind of questions. Can you control this? Do you know how they work? And Job comes to realize there's an awful lot in the universe, and there's an awful lot in the world in which I live that I do not understand and I cannot control. So he learns by looking at the universe. And God is not teaching Job cosmology or animal husbandry. This is stuff that Job knew but did not understand. And the presumption was, I should understand. But understand what? Because Job is struggling with, I should understand what's happening in my life. The real struggle of Job is not his loss, it's that he doesn't understand. He doesn't understand why this has happened. So I want to say that what God does in the book of Job is take human concern, take anthropology, and situates it in cosmology. In a way that does not break him. It's very important. He is not a broken man. He is a man who now has insight, no answers. Job never knows why he suffered. Never. But he stops asking the question. Because the presumption is, you know what you're doing. That is the presumption. So the wonders of creation paraded before Job were not unknown to him before this extraordinary revelation of God. By and large, they consisted the everyday world that he knew, but he didn't understand it. So the book of Job demonstrates the profound human struggle between human-centered interests and cosmo-centered reality. It pits the search for understanding against the enormity of the universe that cannot be grasped. And it does it in a way that the human spirit is enraptured, not broken. Read the end of it. It's very clear he stands with his mouth open. That's mysticism. In the end, cosmology does not crush anthropology. Rather, it opens its arms to welcome back its prodigal child. That's the first lens that the Holy Father speaks of. Another one is the interconnectedness. He talks about this. And I would invite us to look at Genesis 2 creation narrative. You got to remember, this is ancient literature. And it is the literature, this sounds strange, but it is the literature of an oral culture. And in an oral culture, you don't read it, you hear it. And we miss what they hear in translation. We're a strange bunch. We hold the prayer book and say, all you peoples clap your hands. But we hold the prayer book, all right? We got to remember that this comes from an oral culture. So in Hebrew, there are 4 words that we translate as man. One of them is Adam, which is a general term, and they're all masculine, okay? It can mean, and they're all singular. However, the word Adam can also be a collective, so we can translate that humankind. Another one is Enosh, which means limited human man, not sinful. None of this has to do with simple. None of this has to do with sinful. All right? So it's weak human being. A third one is Gibber, which means strong man, which is sometimes translated warrior. In the book of Job, when God says to Job, gird yourself like a gibber, that means gird yourself like a warrior, because I'm going to take you on. All right? And the fourth one is Ish, which means man in relation to another, usually a woman. Therefore, that word is also sometimes translated husband. Now, in the creation narrative, the word is by and large Adam. And if you look at the second creation narrative, Genesis 2, Adam comes from Adamah. That's the word for dirt, Adamah. So Adam comes from Adamah. You hear it. You hear it. And when the woman is created, now you have the word Ish, and the word for woman is Isha. So you hear it. You hear the connection. Now, if you look at the story, the man is made from the ground, but the man is not, and I realize that some feminists understand this as undifferentiated human creature. And those who interpret it that way use a particular literary approach to interpret it that way. I don't use that. I use a different literary approach. And I use the approach of the similarity of the language. So you have the man is made from Adam, but also if you read it carefully, so is the ground, so are the animals made from Adam, and so are the trees. So the very story talks about the very interconnectedness made of the same stuff. We shouldn't be surprised at that. That's our experience. You and I are made of the stuff of earth. We eat it. We breathe it. And we turn it into ourselves. And the reason we can do that, it's basically the same stuff. Some of us do a very good job of turning it into ourselves as well. So what you have here, and remember, I'm looking at the notion of the interconnectedness. You see that in the Genesis 2 creation narrative. There's another passage that we find in Genesis that has to do with the interconnectedness, and that's the story after the flood. And after the flood, God enters into covenant, and God does not enter into covenant only with Noah. Read the text carefully. It says Noah and your sons, which means it's generational, but read it further. God said to Noah and to his sons with him, as for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you. Further on, also, it is with the text says, and with the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, is more specific about it. Covenant is a very, very profound religious term. And part of the problem is it's not part of our everyday vocabulary. Though I understand it is a word that is used in law, but that's about the only place. We don't talk about covenants. We talk about pacts, we talk about agreements. That's what we're talking about. It is a serious relationship that you have with somebody with whom you are not already related by blood. Because covenant gives you the same kind of relationship with those who are not your blood as you have with those who are your blood. and it is serious. There's a story in Genesis 15 where God enters into covenant with Abraham. All right, and you actually see in Genesis 15, it is an account of what they call cutting the covenant. It's a ritual of sealing the covenant. And the ritual is God says to Abram, and again, this is all metaphor, magnificent stories, and they're true, they're just not historical. There's a difference. They're true stories, but they're just not historically accounting. Anyway, so God enters into covenant with Abraham in this way. He says to Abram, get animals, sacrifice the animals, and separate the carcasses. All right, so you separate the carcass, and then there's a story how there's a flame that represents God that walks back and forth between the carcasses. Scholars are pretty much in agreement that that was what a ritual referred to as cutting the covenant, that people would enter into covenant and they would sacrifice animals, separate the carcasses, and the two covenant partners were walked between the separated carcasses. And that action said, if I am not faithful to our covenant responsibility, you have a right to do to me what we have just done to these animals. This is serious business. It's not just something pretty. And particularly in Genesis 9, where we have the rainbow, you get you get birthday cards with a rainbow. It's not always pretty. Covenant is serious business. And that's why you don't enter into it flippantly. Now, of course, I'm talking about the ancient Near East, not just Israel. So when we look at this particular story, who are the partners of the covenant? God and all of creation. I don't know if you can get closer or interconnected in any way at all more than that. So there are passages that speak about this interconnectedness. Now, I'm not prepared to give the ancient Israelites more credit than they deserve. All right? They certainly were not astute in the same way as we are, scientifically. But traditional people have a much more intense relationship with the natural world than our society generally is. Traditional people know where they came from and know where they're going. And these were traditional people. So we've looked at radical anthropocentrism, and we've looked at interconnectedness. The third one has to do with interdependence. And having looked at the interconnectedness, we can now appreciate the ecosensitive principle of interdependence. No one can deny our dependence on elements of the natural world for our survival and our flourishing. What are we, 55 to 60% water? And so our very life depends on the replenishment of that water. We feed off the fruits of earth. It's in this way that the minerals of earth fortify our bodies. I don't have to tell you, we are totally dependent on earth and what earth provides. Again, I want to say it is not dependent on us in the same way. In the ancient world, the way they talked about the dependence and interdependence, or I shouldn't say talk about, the way they acted it out was in the fertility cults. Fertility cults were an attempt in the ancient world, this includes Israel, they were attempts to gain control over the necessary fertility of the woman, of the land, and of animals. And the way they did it was in a ritual, a sexual ritual of sacred marriage. So you would have, usually sacred prostitutes were women. But every once in a while we find in the scripture that there would be a sacred prostitute who was a man. But they were usually women. And the point, of course, was that the prostitute represents, in a certain sense, the divine power. It was a functionary at certain shrines. And then a man would go and have sex with her in a ritual, what's the word that I want? A formulated ritual. And that would ensure fertility. Now, this is condemned by the prophets not primarily because of sex. We think Israel had a problem with sex. Israel had very little problem with sex. The thing is with whom you have it and why you have it. So the fertility cults of ancient Israel were condemned because to enter into that ritual means you are entering into an intimate relationship with another god. That's why fertility cults were condemned by the prophets. And the primary prophet that we find in the Old Testament where this really takes a front stage is the prophet Hosea. And the book of Hosea says that he married a prostitute. We're not quite sure, scholars are not sure whether she was a sacred prostitute, if she was a secular or political prostitute, we're not quite sure. But and also it was the concern in the story of Hosea, it was in a certain sense similar to the acting out of Israel with other gods, the nation with other gods. So the symbol of a god, a foreign god, and a prostitute was compared to or corresponds with the foreign gods and Israel as an unfaithful wife. So what we have then in the prophet Hosea is the condemnation of prostitution, which in the prophet itself, it's the condemnation. It's the prophet who condemns his wife. The prophet insists that the products derived from the fruits of the earth, products upon which humans were so dependent, come from God and not from some pagan deity. It seems that the only way Israel would learn this was if these products were taken away. And so we read that Israel says, or God speaks to Israel saying, I will take them away from her, and then she will know I'm the one that gave her all of these benefits. So the woman, or Israel, because things are taken away from her, repents. And God renews the covenant. And this is the renewal of the covenant. But listen to it. I will make a covenant for them on that day with the wild animals, with the birds of the air, and with the things that crawl on the ground. I will betroth you to me with fidelity, and you will know the Lord. On that day I will respond. I will respond to the heavens, they will respond to the earth will respond to the grain and the wine and the oil, and we will once again be as bride and groom. So there is the sense of Israel being totally dependent on the things of earth given by the God of Israel, not the God of the Canaanites, not any other God. So in a certain sense, that shows how human beings are dependent on earth. There's also a theme that speaks about, in a certain sense, earth's dependence on human beings, and that is what we call land Sabbath. Just as the book of Hosea highlights human beings' dependence on the fertility of earth under the power and authority of God, so the theme Sabbath highlights the dependence of earth's fertility on human behavior. Most people just think of Sabbath as Sunday, or actually it really isn't Sunday, it's Saturday, it's the seventh day. And the reason there's a much broader, it's very important, no question about that, but the Sabbath tradition is broader than that because you have the seventh day, you also have the seventh year, and then you have the 7 times seventh year, which is Jubilee year. Sometimes the Bible talks about it as being the 49th year. Sometimes it's the 50th year. Has nothing at all to do with getting a gold watch. This theology speaks about land Sabbath, and this is a very, very important theme that we find in the book of Leviticus. The Lord said to Moses on Mount Sinai, "Speak to the Israelites and tell them, when you enter the land that I am giving you, let the land too keep a Sabbath for the Lord. For 6 years you may sow your field, and for 6 years prune your vineyard, gathering in their produce. But during the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath for the Lord, when you may neither sow your field nor prune your vineyard. In other words, the Sabbath year, there is to be no farming. It really is a fallow year. Now, on the one hand, that's good agricultural practice. On the other hand, for an agricultural society that's pretty much always facing the possibility of extinction, if not famine, think of how many times Israel experienced famine. And they had to go someplace, frequently to Egypt, because they were experiencing famine. To have a year when there is to be no harvesting was very dangerous for the survival of the people. But it's a religious sense showing that we are dependent on God and not on our skills in harvesting, in sowing and harvesting, or not, and it's land harvesting. That's the focus. It's the Sabbath of the land, not the Sabbath of the animals. This fallow land practice was considered, the land was considered a living reality with both rights and responsibilities. So that's an example of how, just as we find in the prophets, particularly Hosea, where there is the dependence of human beings on the land, land Sabbath also acknowledges that in a certain sense, land is dependent on human stewardship, good stewardship, which is a very awkward word, but we don't have a better one. Unless you want to talk about land Sabbath. But if you do, most people wouldn't know what you were talking about. So those are just 6 different theological themes that pick up 3 of the themes that we find in Laudato Si. One of them is anthropocentrism, a condemnation of radical anthropocentrism. The other one is the interdependence of all, interconnectedness of all creation. Sometimes some scholars refer to that as community of earth. We are all of earth, and earth is a capital E. And the third one is the interdependence. We're so accustomed to using the things of earth for our own purposes that we may fail to think of just exactly what we are doing to earth as we use it. I don't know what you think about fracking. That's a real troublesome thing for many, many people. But of course, it gives us something that's cheaper. And we all know if it's cheaper, it's much better. And I want to tell you, I will go and buy the cheapest gasoline. I do not stand before you as somebody who is beyond all of this. Which means I use gasoline to go someplace to get the cheapest. Doesn't make much sense. So I don't put myself above, but I don't put you above me either. Nature itself has devised a mysterious and delicate balance whereby it continually renews itself. Death in one form gives way to life in a new form. Both animate and inanimate creation is governed by patterns of development that have brought forth the wondrous world of nature of which we are a part. These dynamic patterns regularly refashion Earth. We're part of something that is so dynamic. But the new cosmologists, they talk about the evolving universe. But just without even going out into space, just the way we live on Earth. And again, I don't know you know much about the Gaia hypotheses, that Earth is really, in a certain sense, a living thing. That the powers of life push in such a way that life, begets death, begets life. It is a magnificent thing of which we are a part. All of these dynamic powers are operative within us. We alone of all the creatures of earth can take hold of the powers of creation and reshape them. We alone have discovered fire and harnessed it, the energies of water and wind and sun and the atom. We're magnificent creatures. We alone have the future of Earth's well-being in our hands. Beavers can make dams, but they don't write poetry. Possessing such power, we must never forget our covenant responsibilities. Paul uses the image of a body when he wants to talk about the church. And in that image, and I'm paraphrasing, he says, can the hand say to the feet, because you're not a hand, I have no need of you? Remember that particular passage. I think the image or the metaphor of a body is good to understand earth. And one might say, can the human say to the hippopotamus, because you're not a human, I have no need of you? Remember not too long ago we had a real problem with bumblebees. They were going extinct. Who cares? Everyone should. No bumblebees, no pollination. No pollination, no corn. No corn, you draw your conclusions. We are totally dependent on all of these dynamics. Again, remember not too long ago, we tried to get rid of the wolves in Yellowstone National Park. And all of a sudden we found you get rid of the wolves, and then all of a sudden the deer population explodes. And so they reintroduced the wolves back in, and so the deer population went down. We think, who needs wolves because they threaten us? I live in Chicago. Every once in a while, I don't know what you have out here, but every once in a while, somebody reports a coyote in the backyard. They have come into our neighborhood. We never say we went into theirs. Now, I don't want a coyote in my backyard, but just think of how we think. It's our neighborhood. Okay? Everything we know, we have learned from the vibrant earth. It sustains us. It feeds us. In a very real sense, it invites us, eat of my body, drink of my blood. It is sacramental. Thus we become one with it, and it becomes a part of us. One can rhapsodize, just go on and on mystically. We are nature mystics, you and I. We are nature mystics. Whoever is satisfied watching one sunset or one sunrise? Who is satisfied? Who does not thrill? Maybe you don't. We thrill with the first snow, so long it's not a blizzard. But seriously, think about it. We're nature mystics. We stand with our mouths open before the beauty of nature. Why? Because we're part of it. We're part of it. Our beautiful earth has been gorged and ravaged and polluted and stripped, and all the while it willingly offers its wealth, asking only that it be taken care of in good planning. Our generous earth has been captured and possessed by some to the exclusion of others. And so in a certain sense, the issue is not that eco-justice is a part of social justice. I think it's just the opposite. I think fundamental to everything about us is integrity of creation. That's why I do not like the order peace, justice, and integrity of creation. Integrity of creation, I think, should be first, but no one has asked me. All right? It is fundamental to everything. If we were sensitive to the integrity of creation, under that umbrella, we would have social justice. Under that umbrella, we would have racial and ethnic justice. Because why are we biased against someone whose coloring, which is part of the natural world, is different? Whose hair texture is different? It all has to do with our attitude toward the natural world. Whether that be coloring, texture of the hair, or sexual reproductive organs. It all has to do with the natural world. So that's fundamental to everything. It is within our power if we only are open to a kind of metanoia. And what is in our power? Using the natural world, which we must, but realizing it's not there simply for our abuse. It is there because we are dependent on it. We must be open to a kind of metanoia, an eco-sensitive conversion of mind and heart. We're not merely about saving souls. According to the Holy Father and the bishops, for how many decades, we are not merely about saving souls, nor are we merely about saving bodies, nor are we simply charged with cleaning up our environment. All of that is important. As important as both undertakings might be, our task is the furtherance of the dynamic cosmic design of God. We accomplish this by being faithful to our role as unique members among all the other members of the community of Earth. It's that simple and that challenging. Thank you.
You're a tough act to follow, Professor Bergant, but I'll do my very best and be very brief. I'm Theresia de Vrome. I'm a professor of English, and I'm the director of the Marymount Institute for Faith, Culture, and the Arts. And it's my pleasure to give two gifts tonight. One is for Professor Bergant. We have an artist in residence who could not attend today for the Institute named Will Pupa, and every year he's now made a lithograph for us, and every year we present the same lithograph to our speaker, and don't worry, we won't make you carry it home in a frame. We actually have it wrapped up for you. And I think this is the essence of what was spoken of tonight, and the motto of this depiction of a beautiful woman sitting in a tree with a book is Veritas Filia Temporis. Truth is the daughter of time. So we're happy to present this to you. We'll bring it upstairs. Sister Bergant began her talk speaking about the awe of the sun and the sky at night. And we are so lucky to have the great support of Sister Joan Tracy, Sister Mary Janino, and the R.S.H.Ms here in Los Angeles and throughout the world, actually. And one of the things they help us do is publish books. And we, every year, are able to publish this wonderful little book, the lecture that was given tonight. And this is, the cover of this, some of you can see it, is Psalm 23 by John August Swanson, who, as you know, is here. And I thought I would end with a quotation that he wrote about this that I thought was quite beautiful, quite apropos of what you just did. In this, and you'll see that when we did it, it's only a little portion of his serigraph for Psalm 23, but that the whole back is the stars, and that some of them are embossed. And he wrote, "There is no moon in my image of the night, but the stars create a luminescence to help those who are taking a journey. My vision contains the wonder and awe found in the star-filled night skies. Our earliest ancestors may have gazed up to ponder the brilliance of these lights. They looked for order in the heavens and could marvel the many wonders and spectacular sights held within the glowing clusters of the stars." I invite you now to the Marymount Institute for a reception. There's big windows that look out over the ocean, and I hope you can see the clusters of the stars. Thank you very much.